To start off the evening, we have Francis and Daniel giving us a talk, getting up to speed with ETL. So if you'd like to welcome them, give them a very warm welcome.
There we go. Thank you. Am I just touching this to make it move? Yeah. One. Okay. Okay, so just quick agenda, what we're going to cover to start with. So a bit of a background on us, who Boehringer are. Then we'll move on to ETL, very basic processes, benefits, challenges. And then I'm going to hand over to Dan to talk a bit more about kind of low code and where you might want to use low code. So my name is Francis O'Rafferty. I started out as a BI developer in 2009 and very much business objects focused, realized that you basically can't do a good report if you've got rubbish data. So very quickly moved into being an ETL developer because I wanted to be able to bring data together, solve the challenges that were there in the source systems. And I was very much in the data warehousing space. So mostly using kind of SAP tools, a little bit of Microsoft SSIS. And that was very much, right, how do we bring all this data together? How do we kind of bring value in, mostly in insurance? So I spent most of the 2 years working on a global insurance client, building a data warehouse for them. And then they went, why don't you want to do that as the next insurance client? So I spent 4 years doing data warehouse development for insurance clients. So during that time, I learned a lot about insurance. So I thought, right, I might as well do some insurance qualifications while I'm here, make sure that I understand the business as much as I understand the data so that I can then start to bring more benefit through that. So that was kind of the beginning of my career, spending a lot of time doing that, learning about the business as much as I was learning about the data. Then in 2015, I moved to Accenture. I wanted to kind of go from the small consultancy that I was at to learn how to do ETL at scale. And that's when I really started to see all the different areas of ETL and data engineering that I hadn't necessarily picked up that I was doing before. So I'd been doing all this kind of MDM work, I'd been doing all this provisioning work, I'd been doing all this reconciliation work, and just thinking it was part of being a data warehouse developer. When I got to Accenture, I realized that there's actually a lot of different disciplines within being an ETL developer and a lot of different areas within data engineering. And I ended up working on data provisioning for quite a long time, which was, has a file arrived? What should it have arrived? Can I get an alert if it doesn't arrive? What do I do? Kind of coming up with all the processes of just how do you actually just get data in the first place and get it onto the cloud platform, which is where the industry was at that point. I then went on maternity leave and came back as a data architect, and I went and worked in a data architect team looking at kind of solution architecture that was coming through and saying, yes or no, this aligns to enterprise architecture, you can do that, you can't do that, have you thought about doing it like this? And then I had a second mat leave, and then I came back into more of a data management role. So this is when I started to kind of really appreciate kind of enterprise architecture, data management, the importance of all that within the kind of bringing data together. And it was actually really useful to build on a lot of the skills I'd learned as a data engineer there. And I think actually doing that kind of role after doing data engineering was really, I could tangibly see how you were going to do this, and I could talk to the developers and sort of say, this is why this is important. So I did a lot of cataloging, I did a lot of kind of model design, how are we going to transfer data around the bank, and then supporting the engineers to actually create the pipelines to then transfer that data. I then had a third mat leave, and then I came back and did all my data management qualifications, and that's when I kind of thought, right, I'm in this space now for sure. And then data products, data mesh, everything came up, and I got distracted with that for a while. And now I kind of think with data products, it kind of all comes back together again, and it's about being able to understand all these disciplines at once and being able to really kind of bring a team together to package something and bring real value to a client. And that's kind of what I focused on since I moved to Boehringer in January. So I'm going to let Dan introduce himself as well, and then we'll do a very quick, brief overview of who we are at Boehringer as well, and then I'll jump back in with some basics on ETL.
2 seconds whilst I try and fit this. I might turn it off as well. We'll see if it works. Okay, so a little bit about myself. My career story is a little bit shorter than Francis's. I graduated from University of Birmingham, having done physics back in 2020. So that was really my first sort of bit of a foray into data without really knowing it. A bit of Python, a bit of manipulation, a bit of statistics, that sort of thing. Shortly after I graduated, I moved to a company called Grace. So if you know Kubrick, they've got a similar sort of model. They've taken graduates, give you a bit of training, and then sort of hire you out as a consulting. And then I've been in consulting ever since, particularly within the data space. So I initially sort of started off within data analytics and BI, so mostly sort of doing visualization, that sort of thing. But also with the data pre-processing and loading in that sort of needs to be done before you do any sort of analytics. I don't know if anyone here has ever been to a company where your data is perfectly clean before you actually need to do any visualization or analytics on the top of it. If you have, raise your hand because I want to come work for you. You're that, yeah, okay, I'll come work with you then. So I quickly moved on from there to do a little bit of process automation. So again, still relatively technical, but it was nice to see things from a more business point of view and making sure sort of processes were sort of run smoothly and efficiently and automated where possible. And then I moved across to Beringa at the start of 2022. So I dipped my toes in the waters of full stack development. Very intense, having not done any sort of full stack before. Really enjoyed it, and it was a really nice exposure into some of the more sort of technical best practices and DevOps and that sort of thing. And then I moved quite quickly on into data engineering, which was a bit more my pace. So I spent almost a year sort of working with a client, particularly in the ETL space. So we were delivering a full sort of end-to-end data stack for them. Before we joined, they were just doing everything in Excel manually. So we came in, pipelined everything, built a data warehouse out for them, and then pushed it all into Power BI at the end of it. Involved in most of it, but generally focused on the ETL aspect of it, so the cleansing, the processing, and the business layer as well. Since then, I've dabbled a little bit in the data modeling and data product space, but again, my sort of true interests and true focus is within data engineering. So that's a little bit about me and about Francis. I'm going to talk a little bit about Beringa. Don't worry, I'm not going through the whole slide. So Beringa is a management consultancy, if you didn't already know. We like to think of ourselves as being a little bit different. Our sort of philosophy and our culture is putting people first and creating impact that lasts, which sounds a little bit generic, but I'm going to try and highlight a few different points. So in terms of putting people first, we really like to try and partner with our clients as opposed to sort of having a us and them culture. We like to work sort of shoulder to shoulder, all being part of the same team, aiming for the same sort of objectives. We find working like that sort of tends to avoid having some of that insider-outsider dynamic and helps to reduce some of the conflict you get from that, which typically comes when you've got clients who don't necessarily want the consultants in there. If you're all sort of part of the same team, it goes a bit more smoothly. And in terms of creating impact that lasts, we always like to, we've got quite a wide range of people within Beringa. We've got a number of capabilities, a number of industry specialisms. So we like to go into every client with a team that's sort of bespoke to that project and the needs of the client, so that we can go in and solve the problem in the best way possible. And from day one, we like to sort of start that knowledge transfer so that when we leave, the capability is still there. It's not us running off and then everything breaking all of a sudden. So that's all about us and about Beringa. Francis is now going to talk a little bit about ETL. And do you want that one back? There you go.
Okay. So, ETL. The purpose of it, we are getting data and we're taking it from operational systems and we're putting it into analytical systems. That's essentially what we're doing, right? So we want to move away from operational, where you're talking about a customer has done this, a customer came to a store and bought this, to analytical, which is what are they buying from my store, who's coming in, what kind of demographics, etc. So if you are basically getting a load of tables from your source and you're bringing them through and you're just renaming them, you're probably not transforming the data. If you're in the source and you're bringing through every single table that's in there, including things that are to do with the application formats and the RGB colors, then you're not transforming it. And if you're bringing through like every single history column and capturing system IDs and session IDs, then you're not transforming it, right? You start at this end, right? We start here. We start by understanding what the business needs and what we're trying to develop. And then we go back and work out where that source is. Once you've then worked that bit out, you then are bringing your source, you're landing it, you do all your archiving, this is where you're kind of capturing, how do I recreate something that happened? I mean, I've worked mostly with financial services, so they're always like, how can I run the same report that I ran 6 months ago and get the same answer so I can go back and tell the regulator I know exactly what happened then. So that's where you want to kind of capture that bit. In your staging, that's all about, right, cleansing, making sure that you've got the data in the right format. So things where you've gone, you're bringing local systems together into a global system, making sure that everything is aligned to global identifiers. You're kind of mastering, you're kind of, not the mastering, but the kind of looking up your ranking anti-reference data, etc. And these two bits are very much source aligned. So this is staying with your source. On the other end, you've then got the consolidated bits. That's the bit where you're first integrating. That's where your kind of master data management happens. So if you've got customers in multiple systems at this point, how do you make sure that you've got your one customer there? And then the presentation layer, which is very much like if you're starting to do like history capture, and you want things named again, you want to do calculations, that would all be in the presentation layer. And this is very much target aligned. Now, throughout this whole process, the question that always comes when you get to the end is, so where does that come from? So whilst you're doing the ETL, if you're not documenting the lineage, you're never going to get to this outcome that people are looking for. If you're not reconciling at every stage, the amount of projects that you've gone in and you've looked at the presentation layer and said, and somebody comes along and goes, well, that's not how many customers we've got. How did you get that number? And if you don't have the reconciliation at each stage and you can't take them on that journey with you, no one's going to trust the stuff that comes out the other end. And then again, with the quality and profiling, again, people will recognize if you've got things in there and you've got multiple statuses for open, multiple statuses for closed, if you just haven't got it aligned, you need to use the trust straight away, and people just kind of go, well, I'm not going to use that. I'm going to just go off and get that spreadsheet from Bob, who, I know his numbers. I've trusted those before. So the whole time we're doing ETL, we should be remembering what the target is and not just trying to pull everything through from source into the platform. So again, why do we do it? What's it doing for the business? So I tend to think, one, it's trying to integrate. So by integrating, we drive efficiency. So instead of having to go and find data from 5 different sources, it's all in one place. We've done the cleansing for them. It's in a usable bit where they can go and do their analysis and get some insights from it. It's also just better operationally than trying to run a query against 3 different schemas in 3 different places. Consistency, so again, this comes back to the trust. We talk about ETL producing a single source of truth. We talk about building pipelines to get kind of trusted outputs. That comes from kind of the reference data management, the master data management, et cetera, that we build into this data engineering process and not forgetting about those as we go. And then the third one is the language, the common language. The reason we're moving this into the analytical plane is that people can use it and explore it, that business users are going to do it. So getting away from any of the kind of technical column names and getting it into real business terms. So that's kind of why we do it. And then a couple of challenges that kind of came to mind when me and Dan were thinking about where we run into pitfalls with the clients that we've worked with. So source system challenges is nearly always the one. I don't think anyone will have worked on a project where there hasn't been something in the source system that's made it really difficult to do. I think I was saying to someone earlier, 10 years ago, I was doing a data warehousing project where we were trying to bring together a load of data whilst they were migrating their policy system from one system to another system, and we were bringing in flags that said this one's been migrated, so filter it out of this pipeline now, put it into this flow instead. So once it appears here, stop bringing it from here. I'm still working on a client that's going through a policy transformation, and we are coding stuff into the pipelines to say if it's in this system, it comes from here, it comes from here. There's always going to be multiple transformations happening at the same time, and being aware of what's happening in the source it is really key. I think there's also times where we're bringing in a lot of legacy sources and the person that built it or owned it isn't there anymore and there's no documentation anymore, and you kind of have to deal with all those bits. You quite often get complexity of the integration. Somebody says, we just want to see all our customers in one place, and then you start looking at that and you go, yeah, okay, the quality of the data then makes that a lot more complex than what it should be. Or you've got kind of, again, in financial services, there's a lot of regulatory reports to unpick, and you're kind of looking at these regulatory things going, okay, what data points do I need to get that? And then trying to go, right, how do I find that? How do I get that consistent? And again, that ends up being quite complex. And again, that feeds into the business requirements. So missing edge cases is a big one. You kind of code for what you think is going to happen. And then as a developer, you kind of get to a certain point and you go, well, that's not what I thought was going to happen. And then how do you work around that? The scalability, I think, again, this came up on a call today. Kind of, we were trying to run a report and it didn't run as fast as we wanted it to because the complexity and the things that have been baked into it. So how do we push the complexity as early as possible in the engineering so that at the end of it, we get the operational and performance we want? And then monitoring and reconciliation. So alert-based monitoring, like when we deliver this stuff, that's not it. Like it's not the tick in the box and we go. This needs to be managed really well and making sure that that management is easy. So where I've seen this work really well is when you kind of almost have that kind of, now it's kind of more of a product owner role or something, but like previously I've seen it as like a data warehouse manager role and it's all alert based. So they come in, if there's an error, the error's there in front of them. But if it's completed, it's also there. And making sure that you're really clear around this is completed and it's ran successfully, other than this is completed and absolutely no data ran through it, that's one of the edge cases that often gets missed. So you come in every day for 3 days thinking it's all fine and then you realise that actually it's just ran nothing. So yeah, I don't know, I've probably covered all yours as well, Dan, but if you've got anything else to add, I'm sure you've equally seen a number of challenges in this space.
Smooth transition. I've got one more actually to talk about that's literally been happening over the last couple of days. We've had one of our applications, one of the source systems for our applications, we've got an API that's feeding data in from it, and they changed the API without telling anyone or telling us with no notice. So we all woke up on Wednesday morning and everything was broken and we had no idea why, right? And you get all sorts of challenges like that. Everyone here will have seen it. And there's not often things that you can really do. It just requires trust and communication. And you can put safeguards in place and processes in place, but if they're not followed, there's not really a whole lot you can do about it, sadly. But yeah, I'm sure we'll all have seen and sympathise with a lot of these points. So I'm now going to talk a little bit about low-code tools specifically within the ETL space. So a lot of this will apply to low-code tools more generally, but my experience is mostly with them within ETL. So who here has heard about Microsoft Fabric? Put your hands up if you heard of Fabric. Okay, so a few people, not as many as I was expecting actually. So Microsoft Fabric is a really big example. Microsoft generally is quite a big player in this low-code space at the minute. Within Azure, you've got Data Factory, which is sort of low-code pipelining. Fabric, which for those who don't know is like end-to-end low-code for your data sort of lifecycle. So from ingestion to transformation to storage to visualization, everything like that, sort of software as a service. Again, sort of integrating really well with the Power Platform. There are a few other sort of names in the space. I've Googled most of these, so if you recognize any of them and you think absolutely they're not low-code, then I do apologize. The one on there that might surprise you a little bit is Power Query. So in every business, I don't think you're ever going to truly get rid of Excel. And it's a really valuable tool, right, for really simple things, ad hoc stuff. Not everything has to be pipelined and automated, but Power Query is a really nice way of pulling things in from other sources into Excel in a somewhat automated way, and it's low code, so it's really easy to use. So there are loads of these tools out there. I don't think they're going away. They're only going to improve and get more mature and more flexible. But there are challenges and there are benefits to using these tools as well. For anyone who hasn't seen any of these tools before, this image on the left-hand side for you, right-hand side for you guys, is from Azure Data Factory. So it's a really sort of simple interface, normally drop and drag, and generally quite a low sort of learning curve to get to it. So some of the benefits and challenges. I'm going to start with benefits. So if the slide works. So the first benefit I see, and probably one of the biggest ones, is there's a really low barrier to entry with these. There are loads of courses online, especially for the Microsoft stuff, that's all free, and you can pick it up and within a day know what you're doing mostly with these sort of tools and software. So it's really easy to bring people in. And what we find is that actually this lines up quite well with like a company that's looking to democratize data or going for like a hub and spoke model. You can have your sort of specialized, more technical users in your hub, and then you can provide some of these low-code tools to your spokes where they don't necessarily have the technical skills, but they have the business knowledge. You can equip them with these low-code tools and give them a way of producing simple solutions that give them the analytics they need, whilst taking the workload off your more sort of technical developers and giving them the space they need to build the more complex solutions that the company really needs. The next of these is, it generally comes with fast development time. Because they're pretty simple to use, you don't have to worry about setting up different environments. It's just drop and drag. The development time for these is really quite quick. You don't have to worry about the quality of your code. It's all sort of done behind the scenes for you. The next of these, I've sort of just come onto it anyway, but simplified development process. It's literally just sort of hit save, publish, and then it's there for users to use. If you want it to be, you can do it really, really quickly. I think I went from Power Apps again within Microsoft Power Suite. I went from not knowing it to building a working app within like less than a week. So you can get things deployed really, really quickly, and it's really simple to do. And as I mentioned, it reduces your sort of workload on your more technical developers if you want it to. You don't need you don't need to be bringing your more technical developers to use these low-code tools. The best way I feel to use them is to get your business users who don't have the technical expertise for the more complex systems to be developing with these. That way you're taking things out of manual processes in Excel to a more automated and safe way that's going to reduce the likelihood of human error, but also giving the business users the ability to do that. And the final one of these is generally it can be cheaper for suitable solutions. Now, I say suitable solutions because if you're using low code for the wrong reasons and for the wrong types of challenges, it can very quickly become more expensive and take longer to develop. But for simple solutions that don't require a complex solution, then it can be cheaper and quicker. So moving on to the challenges, with the low code, simple sort of user interface, it's generally less customizable and less flexible. So if you need to write like a 3-level loop or something like that, I pray for you if you do, but you can't really do that sort of thing within low code systems. And it's really hard to to sort of customize. More mature solutions, so things like Data Factory, do allow you to code. So if you've got something that you can't do with this sort of simple drop and drag, there are workarounds for it, but then you're moving away from it being a truly low code solution, so having something that's more complex. And that's the sort of time where you might have your business users go, actually, wait a minute, I need something a little bit more complex. Let's involve your hub, let's involve your more technical engineers and get them involved to do some of that more technical stuff as well. The second is, especially with some of the newer tools, there's quite limited system integration. So Data Factory is pretty good for this. It's part of Azure, so it integrates with loads of different stuff. But there are going to be new tools that don't have some of those integrations. So if you've got quite a niche third-party software, for example, that's got a really specific way of connecting to your data, the likelihood of your low-code solution being able to connect to it is pretty minimal. The third of these is that they're less scalable generally. So when it comes to dealing with large amounts of data, so if you're talking about even like hundreds of gigabytes or terabytes of data, they tend to start to struggle. Again, some of the more mature of these tools have workarounds for this. So again, Data Factory, you can run sort of Spark notebooks and stuff like that. But again, you're still moving away from that low code into the more technical development for that sort of use case. And finally, and I think this is one of the biggest problems I see, is that best practice often isn't followed. And this is particularly the case if you're getting your business users involved, which you should be with these. It's really important to make sure that they're not just learning how to drag and drop things onto the page, that they're actually understanding the standards that your business is setting and also the best practices for development. The number of times I've seen people from the business create tables where the field names are like questions. So what is this transaction type, or what date was this on? Instead of using like more sensible field names, it's too many to count. Business models can get really, really messy really quickly. So it's really important to still have that like quality check and to have an understanding of those best practices and internal standards to make sure that things are maintainable and sustainable for the long run. Otherwise, you can run into some quite tricky situations very quickly. So those are the challenges and the benefits. So when really do you want to use these solutions? So the first is, if you've got something that's straightforward to solve, then low code is generally a good option for that. Again, because it's generally quicker than having to build out a full sort of coded solution, and it can be cheaper in terms of like development time and technical expertise as well. Second is if your system integration is available through your chosen low-code platform. So if you've got a common type of connector, so generally if it's like a REST API or a SQL database connection, you're probably good. But if you've got something that's a little bit more niche, then you probably want to check that you can actually connect to your data and output data to your chosen destinations through your tool. The next one is if a solution needs to be launched really quickly. Because low code is really good for sort of quick solutions, it's a good option. This is especially for like if you've got a proof of concept or something that's only going to be live for a couple of months, then low code is generally probably quite a good way to go. I'd hesitate though if this is going to be something that's going to be used for the next 10 years though and is going to need to be scaled up, because then it's not necessarily going to be so sustainable. And my final point on here is making sure or asking, do your developers or whoever's going to be building out these low-code solutions, do they understand those best practices and internal standards? Because if they don't, then it's going to get messy really quickly and very unmaintainable. So that's a really, really important one and key when you start using these low-code solutions. Anything else? Lovely. Yeah, so that's everything we had. I think we've got a couple of minutes for questions, if anyone's got anything. Yeah? Yeah, you want to go through the mic?
Hi, good evening, this is Shanta. So you mentioned that, right? So there is the API, they have changed the API, but the other side, I mean, the source side, yeah. You got to head up with the issues. So how you come up with the solution, like preventive actions or like, it shouldn't be happen the second time. So what is the agreement or what are the process you have implemented after that?
Sorry, I'm not sure I understand.
The API, you mentioned that, right? So they have changed the API,
yes.
The source system. So due to that, actually your pipelines got filed, right? So how you manage that? Like, so in case if it is happened, what could be the?
Okay. Yes. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. So the question was. Well, how do we stop the API issue happening again, right? So what we're looking to do right now is actually just put more robust communication in place. So at the minute we didn't get any warning that anything was going to change. So the first thing we're trying to do is make sure that those communication pipelines are in place, so that if more changes come, we can sort of plan for them basically. And then I mean, some of the apps aren't live yet, which is why we didn't pick up on it sooner, but we're looking to introduce alerting as well. So it's one of the things that Francis was talking about. Monitoring and alerting is key so that you can pick up those issues early and deal with them as soon as you can before it gets to users, hopefully.
There's something called schema evolution. Have you heard of that?
No, it's relatively early days in this development, so we haven't really...
That's actually a potential solution for your JSON table breaking or changing.
Yes. So
sorry. Okay. Hi, good evening. This is Krishna here. So there's a concept called schema evolution, where essentially, let's say you start with a schema which has, I don't know, 20 columns and XYZ names, right? And there's a like int and text and whatnot. And suddenly a developer says, okay, I want to capture geotag for this particular customer that's not accommodated for, right? And then now you have to take it as a part of ETL, right? Now this is a new schema compared to the old schema. So how do you handle that, right? That was your kind of question, isn't it? So essentially, Data Factory and all these big tools, so the good tools, they have this capacity of schema evolution. However, this is a superpower. So you want to use it very carefully, because if you allow that, and then everything else can break, so you have to be extremely careful. I mean, where I agree with you that, you have to use it very carefully. So as a part of schema evolution, you have different options where you can say, okay, I will allow this particular column to evolve into 2 more columns, or change the data type. Or I can allow something like the range of this schema can be different, right? apart from schema, we also want to look at data quality, which means if the data quality breaks and suddenly goes haywire, what do you do? So all of these questions are part of schema evaluation, but then like I explained, you have to use it very carefully. Generally, the best practice is don't do that, right? So, but then if you have to do it, you have to do it. That's the thing, yeah. There you go.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Anything for Francis?
So earlier you mentioned Microsoft Fabric,
Yep.
which is obviously it's at the moment it's a one of a kind offering, right? So my question to you is, what do you think about how the low-code experience in Fabric with things like Data Flows Gen 2 blurs the line between a low-code scenario and a pro-code scenario?
Thank you. I'll be honest, I've not done a lot in Fabric myself. We have others within the team. I don't see anyone at the minute, unless anyone wants to put their hand up. No. So, although I've not done a lot with the data flows in Fabric, I've done a fair bit in Data Factory, and I think it's a fairly similar sort of solution. Correct me if I'm wrong. But I think it's something to be careful with, because it gives you some of the flexibility that you need, having that sort of coded element to it. But you also need to make sure that whoever is doing that development knows what they're doing with that code. Because if you're training up your business users to use some of these low-code solutions, and then they decide, oh, it's not quite doing what I want it to do, I'm going to go and code it and customize it, and then they break something because they don't know what they're doing with the code, it's a bit of a risk, right? So there's a bit of a balance, and that's where you need to have those guidelines in place, I think, to make sure people understand this is what I can do with the level of training and understanding I've got, and this is where I need to go and get help from someone who's got more experience and got the expertise needed to solve some of these problems properly.
I think we're going to have to move on to our next speaker of the evening, but you could definitely catch Daniel and Francis afterwards if you'd like to question them or interrogate them a bit more. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.